If you follow the news closely, now in the year of 2024, politically speaking, America today is standing at the crossroads. Again, in a few months, that we're going to elect a brand new president. Now, given the fact that today, among the voters or American citizens, that we have to say that today, when we talk about the word democracy, that too often we tend to think about another phrase, which is called political polarization. Now, don't get me wrong, it's rather complicated to understand the concept of political polarization. Well, given the fact that such concept or such structured system has built into every single area of our lives. For example, take a look at what's happening to the education today. More and more younger generations today are actually walking away from pursuing higher education as simply because it's too complicated or it is because too political. But meanwhile, we also need to understand this political polarization has also linked to what we call the literacy world and particularly related to children's book. Now, why does that matter today? And when we talk about the younger generations and we talk about the books and the literature for our children, ultimately we want them to be informed and to understand the historical facts and also to understand what's happening today. But that's not really the case for the left, or that's not really the case for the political polarization. Now, how should we understand the issue and why is it important we need to address those topics today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Mr. Jonah Winter. Again, Mr. Winter is a award-winning author of more than 40 children's books that promote social justice, facts, and artistic expressions, nonconformity, and baseball. And his books include 3 New York Times Best Illustrated books, Diego, Here Comes The Garbage Barge, and the Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And again, he's very active in expressing his views through his work. Well, Mr. Winter, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Mr. Winter, I want to get started. As I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you because of this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled Cancel Culture Dominates Children's Literature. Publishers and authors live in fear that self-interested activists unwielden their work problematic. Now, I want to get started. In the article, you talk about one of the amazing books that you covered in the article is called Lillian's Right to Vote. Let's get started with that book. What is that book about and why that book was so controversial in the article?
Well, I actually, my intention in the article was not to say that book was controversial. When I published that book, it was very well received. It's a book about a 100-year-old Black woman, something who when I was writing, I was like 55-year-old white man. At least in many ways have nothing in common with, but I was using something that is known as empathy and imagination and research to write this book that is essentially a celebration of racial justice and an examination of racial injustice. And it's about this 100-year-old Black woman who's walking up a hill to vote. And as she walks up the hill, she's seeing scenes from history, like all the many members of her generations dating back to the 1800s who didn't have the right to vote because they were Black. And all the roadblocks that were put up in front of them to vote because they were Black. And so this book sort of traces her memories of these scenes from American history as she's walking up the hill. And it's a slow climb for this 100-year-old woman to walk up this hill to the voting booth where she votes. And it's 2008 is when this is set. And it was inspired by the story of a real person. I mean, my story is fictional, but it was inspired by a newspaper story I read about a woman named Lillian who, the person in Pittsburgh, where it's very hilly, where I live, who was going to vote on November 2008, casting her vote for who turned out to be the first Black president. So book was a celebration of a lot of things, and also just an examination of America's troubled history, and with as far as racial justice goes. It got a lot of great reviews, and I think got 5-star reviews. It was an award winner. It was very celebrated. It wasn't controversial at all. In fact, people are still talking about it and still using it. It's still a very popular book. The reason I mentioned that in my article is because a year later, everything changed with the Scholastic's cancellation of the book A Birthday Cake for George Washington, which a social media mob shut down through their activism with a petition demanding that the book be canceled. The publishers now took note, and this book was George Washington's The Birthday Cake for George Washington was edited by a Black woman. It was illustrated by a Black woman, and it was written by a woman of color, a Trinidadian Persian woman. And so if a book like that could get canceled, and it got canceled because many people were offended by the fact that there were smiling enslaved people in it, if that could get canceled, then anything can get canceled. And I had a book at the time on about slavery, and not sugar-coated at all. There were no smiling enslaved people in my book. There weren't going to be. It hadn't been illustrated yet, but it had been fully accepted. The final draft had been accepted, and then I got a call from the editor on the morning that this controversy exploded in the news about the George Washington book, and from then on out, I knew that he was going to cancel it, and the book was ultimately canceled. And so, no, there was nothing controversial about Lillian's right to vote. What became a problem was anyone, especially white people, especially white men, writing outside of their identity, because this rule went into place in the publishing world, almost like I don't know if you've heard of the Hollywood codes that were in place back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. Well, it's like a code that's in place that now your identity has to match your subject matter. So I could not get Lillian's Right to Vote published right now if I tried to. I couldn't get many of the books I've written published right now because my identity, because it's ironic since I have devoted so much of my career to promoting diversity in children's books about all sorts of people who don't look like me, who don't have a whole lot in common with me, including a 12th century mystic and migraine sufferer named Hildegard von Bingen, who I definitely don't have a lot in common with. But, this is what I've devoted my career to, and now I'm told that I can't write books like this. And, this is, it's not printed, this code, it's just everybody knows it. It's stated. So that one of the big reasons I wanted to write this op-ed was to get that out there and to also let the general public know about what's happening in the publishing world. I mean, all you hear from the publishing world is about the evils of right-wing book banning. And I am not a fan of right-wing book banning. I came out with a book called Banned Book, which I have right here, which is, it's about a book that gets removed from a school. I understand the dangers of right-wing book banning, but that's all they talk about, to the exclusion of the sort of censorship that's happening within the children's book world. So that's a very long answer to your question.
Well, again, Mr. Winter, now let's go back to the answer that you just shared with us. I mean, to me, again, when we look at children's literature, I mean, again, as we mentioned before, it's important for children today to understand the facts and to celebrate the historical figures and the contributions to the American Revolution and also to the development, or even, I dare to use the word, transformation of America. But today, again, going back to the article that you mentioned, that more and more children's publishers now live in fear because of those activists, and again, terrified of showing up on their radar with a book or author that could be deemed as problematic, a meaning out of alignment with activist, a puritanical code. Now, Mr. Winter, let's talk about this. How should we understand what is happening today to children's book? I mean, again, why is it that today, when we talk about this cancel culture, when we talk about this woke culture, it's so influential to children's literature. What is the ultimate goal that for those activists or for those people who strongly advocate for those movements, what they're trying to accomplish from your perspective? I mean, you are experienced in writing, and you are, again, as you mentioned before, you promote social justice and you promote diversity. Why is that a problem today in America?
Well, there are many things I could say in response to that, but one of the first things I would say is that the people promoting this idea of own voices, that your identity must match the subject matter, and the people promoting the kind of puritanical ideology that I was talking about, I would say far left ideology. In other words, the only ideas and ideals that can get promoted in a children's book are the ones that are super far left, and the authors themselves have to prove their bona fides in that regard in order to get published. So anyone who criticizes this, like me, is immediately seen as problematic. The people promoting, they would say all they want is diversity. I would say what they want is actually revenge on a certain level. They believe this is a zero-sum game. That I, as a white author, am taking contracts away from authors of color, and I'm an old white man, and we've heard enough from old white men, and it's time that people of every different identity imaginable, whether that's a racial identity, sexual identity, gender identity, neuro identity, that they should tell their own stories. I do not have a right to do that. And so they view literature not as literature, they view it as a power struggle and as a zero-sum game, so that there's not room for all of us to have our voices heard. No, these people whose voices have not been heard need to be heard, and you, old white man, just need to shut up and sit down and listen for a change. I think maybe they would argue with what I'm saying right now, but that is my interpretation. They advertise what they're doing as something positive, but in fact, what they're doing is the activists who've kind of changed the way the publishing world works have pressured the publishers through social media threats to accepting this kind of dogma that is very much anti-white people, anti-heterosexual, anti-men. There's especially heterosexual white man. I should have just concluded all that in one phrase. So it's that's the short answer to this. The essay that I got published was originally 7,000 words long. So I have so many things I could say on this. It's I could write a whole book in answer to your question, but that's a little bit of that's kind of the Cliff Notes answer.
But Mr. Winter, but don't you think that what they're doing today, it's not actually encouraging kids to read more? It's actually driving kids away from reading. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned before, as a father of 2 kids, I want my kids to understand more about diversity. I want my kids to appreciate that how diverse our world today, and also imagine that. And again, I have a daughter who's 3 years old, and I want her to understand this famous speech done by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And also, again, we're looking at the Thurgood Marshall, and we're looking at Malcolm X, and all those historical figures that would revolutionize the whole world. But meanwhile, I say, if I were a writer, I would love to contribute my thoughts and my opinions so that I can influence the much greater younger generations. But what they're doing today, it's killing the children from reading more, or even to shaming a good author or even illustrator like you to cross the borders or cross the aisles to have the conversation. So why do you think they're targeting children's book, even children's mind? I dare to ask, is it because the political polarization today in the U.S., or is it because the country today is heading towards a wrong direction when we look at the history, or when we look at the facts? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I have said, and what I had said in the longer version of my essay that didn't quite make it into the essay, was that both the right wing with their book banning and the left wing with their cancel culture are using children as pawns in their war with each other. They cry these crocodile tears about, oh, we have to protect children from harm because it's all about harm and how dangerous books are. Both sides talk about how dangerous books are, and it's just so disingenuous. And well, first of all, calling a book dangerous, saying that children need to be protected from books is just the ultimate big lie. Children need to be protected from guns, bombs, cars, social media, climate disaster, any number of real things out there. They don't need to be protected from books, but both sides claim that children need to be protected from books, and they're waging this ideological and moral battle with each other, both the far left and the far right, in elementary school classrooms. And the children just sit there thinking, the kids don't care about any of this stuff.
Right.
Kids care about, they want a good story. They want a story told well. They want a book that engages them. They don't care about what the author's identity is. That has nothing to do with anything for a child. This is entirely an adult war that is being imposed on children. I'm sorry if I sound worked up, but it makes me furious, this whole thing.
Now, Mr. Winter, I do feel the same way because, again, as we're going back to say that if this is an issue among adults, that we should not use children as the pawn, or we should not use children as the political soundbite and just to satisfy our political needs or even our selfish needs. But again, I got two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about the word identity. I know this is something that you mentioned back and forth. When we talk about the identity today, of course, there's no denying that political identity is standing at the crossroads. And again, we're looking at this political polarization. We'll look at the social changes and this economic agenda. Now, despite what you just said, let me ask you another question related to identity. How much do you think this far left and far right and whatever the advocates or even the people who strongly oppose those, or even support this cancel culture or the woke culture, etc., how much do they actually understand the word identity? I mean, are we talking about when we talk about identity is who we are and we're supposed to be the way we're born into, or because of this pop culture, because of this cancel culture, we are changing or we're being persuaded into this false identity today? What do you say to that, Mr. Winter?
Well, I think, yes, you hit on a very important, that's a really good question. It needs to be expanded on probably even longer than we have time for. But yes, the word identity now, I mean, presumably it could have a very personal, individual meaning, like what is your identity? Well, let me talk about my whole life and what I've done, and not just the genetic traits that I have no control over, like the color of my skin, or my color of my eyes, or how tall I am, or whether I'm male or female. The identity is now basically being used as a word to delineate tribal divisions between people. It is being used as something to divide people, both on the right and on the left. And I think, for me at least, it has a pretty negative connotation the way it's now being used. It doesn't have to, like you rightly point out, to the word itself is an innocent word that has only in recent years come to be such a politically charged word. But it's politically charged because people use it to define tribes, and to especially, I would say, on the left. More than on the right. It is used as a way of delineating tribes that people must stay in, as in stay in your own lane. It is a very limiting, it's sort of a straitjacket of a word, I think, right now, the way it's being used. And it's really unfortunate because, especially when it comes to literature is about the imagination. It's not to be too obvious, but it's about words. It's about expression. The idea that it somehow has to be limited by this political obsession with tribal identity, whether the tribe is like neurodivergence or sexual orientation or whatever. It's unfortunate to put it mildly.
It is very unfortunate. Now, Mr. Winter, I want to go back to your article. And again, this is something that you wrote, and I quote, "My career will likely suffer more damage because of what I've written here, so be it. And many of those leading the charge to cancel books and authors have done so to protect their careers. Some things are more important than protecting one's own career, such as protecting everyone's right to be heard." I mean, again, I couldn't agree with you more, but at the end of the day, Mr. Winter, help us with better understanding. Why is it important for such an author like you to speak out? I mean, again, we're looking at how this political agenda are brainwashing children's literature, or even the distorting the meaning of reading, the distorting the meaning of education. Why is it important for you to speak out and to understand, even to appreciate whatever is justice, whatever it's righteous to be done today?
I'll tell you, because somebody needs to speak out. We live in an age ruled by fear. What fear has driven this whole thing in the publishing world, the cancel culture and the new rules that are in place. It's fear of a social media firestorm, and we have to all overcome that fear. And I myself felt that I was uniquely suited to be one to show an example of overcoming this fear, to speak out against this really huge problem. Because when you limit, when you start putting up barriers to free speech, and by the way, you don't have to be a government to do that. The Hollywood blacklist shows that a corporation can also very much be an enforcer of censorship. And what's happening in the publishing world is the most egregious form of non-governmental censorship in America since the Hollywood blacklist. And it is something that has to be confronted, has to be talked about. And what I said is true. The people not talking about it are only not talking about it to either protect or promote their careers and their brand and their reputation. And I do think, God, I hope there's something more important in this world than just protecting your career. I hope that ideals such as democracy and freedom of speech still matter. And that's exactly why I wrote this essay, knowing full well the damage that it's going to bring upon my head. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. I have no doubt that it will. And it's the editors, the publishing companies are terrified of people speaking out like I just spoke out, and they do not reward it. I will not be rewarded for this.
Of course, Mr. Winter, we admire your brevity and also your boldness in speaking out against those political polarizations. And of course that today, I mean, again, as a father myself, that it saddens me to see that how political agenda is contaminating and polluting our children's minds, and also, of course, that even tap into children's literature. I mean, again, as we mentioned before, you're a good author and you're an amazing author that continue to tell the truth, continue to celebrate social justice and diversity in the world that we're actually living in today. But there should be no room for everyone continue to live with comfort and to knowing that children, again, as you mentioned before, they're supposed to be informed and to be educated with good materials and also with tangible and useful practical knowledge in order to prepare them for the better future. So I hope that more people are able to go online to check out your article and also to celebrate your work. This is something that's truly amazing. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Mr. Jonah Winter. Again, Mr. Winter is the award-winning author of more than 40 children's books. And again, he promotes social justice, facts and artistic expression, nonconformity, and many other topics. And I strongly encourage everyone go online, check out his article. It's called "Cancel Culture Dominates Children's Literature: Publishers and authors live in fear that self-interested activists will deem their work problematic. Well, Mr. Winter, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to discuss what's happening today in the U.S. And meanwhile, we really wish you the best of luck, and we want to hear more from you. So thank you so much for doing this.